It's Tuesday, January 27th, 2026, an interesting series of events at the White House. Canada surrenders and jihad in Washington. Next on the AM Update. Well, this is how it went down yesterday. Some interesting developments from President Trump. Here is the first post on Truth Social. Quote, I'm sending Tom Homan to Minnesota tonight. That would have been last night. He has not been involved in that area, but knows and likes many of the people there. Tom is tough but fair and will report directly to me. Separately, a major investigation is going on with respect to the massive $20 billion plus welfare fraud that's taken place in Minnesota and is at least partially responsible for the violent organized protests going on in the streets. Additionally, the Department of Justice and Congress are looking at Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who left Somalia with nothing and is now reportedly worth more than $44 million. Time will tell. Thank you for your attention in this matter. Later on in the morning, President Trump posted this. Governor Tim Walz called me with a request to work together with respect to Minnesota. It was a very good call, and we actually seem to be on a similar wavelength. I told Governor Walz that I would have Tom Homan call him and that we are looking for are all criminals that they have in their possession. The governor very respectfully understood that, and I will be speaking to him in the near future. He was happy that Tom Homan was going to be in Minnesota, and so am I. We have had such tremendous success in Washington, D.C., Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans, Louisiana, and virtually every other place that we have touched, and even in Minnesota. Crime is way down, but both Governor Walz and I want to make it better. And then this. Yesterday afternoon, President Trump posted, I just had a very good telephone conversation with Mayor Jacob Frey of Minneapolis. Lots of progress is being made. Tom Homan will be meeting with him tomorrow in order to continue the discussion. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Here is Governor Tim Walz's characterization of the communication he had with President Trump. Quote, I had a productive call with President Trump earlier today. I told him we need impartial investigations of the Minneapolis shootings involving federal agents and that we need to reduce the number of federal agents in Minnesota. The president agreed to look into reducing the number of federal agents in Minnesota and to talk to DHS about ensuring the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is able to conduct an independent investigation as would ordinarily be the case. And then there is this development, also widely reported yesterday afternoon. Multiple federal sources confirmed, I think it was to Fox News first, that Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino, you've heard that name, you've probably seen him all over the place, Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino and some but not all Border Patrol agents will be leaving the state of Minnesota immediately. So just to distill that timeline of events down for you, first thing in the morning, President Trump says he's sending Tom Homan to Minnesota. Second thing, and I think there's something that I missed actually until yesterday afternoon, President Trump says that Tim Walz called him. That's interesting. That detail is interesting. And then President Trump says he talked to Jacob Frey, Minneapolis mayor. Tim Walz does not dispute that he called Trump. Now, there were some other insinuations. There were some other characterizations of what they actually talked about from the Walz camp. But what Walz is saying is that they had a good and productive conversation. And then we learned that Greg Bovino, leaving, along with some of his agents, leaving Minnesota immediately. What do we make of these developments from the White House, out of the White House yesterday? I don't really know. I think there's one of two ways you can see this. We won't know the full answer until the ensuing days pass and we really see what the results of these conversations were. But we'll talk about that more in Air Analysis. Now, this is a topic we didn't even talk about yesterday, but independent journalist Cam Higbee was able to infiltrate that massive Signal group chat that communist orcs are using in Minnesota for very sophisticated and efficient communication. It's the reason why they're able to swarm ICE agents and other agents of the federal government. It's why they're able to keep tabs on wherever they are, swarm them when they want to. They're actually passing around license plates. They have spotters everywhere around the Twin Cities. Independent journalist Cam Higbee was able to infiltrate that Signal group chat. And if you don't know what Signal is, it's an application on your phone. It's end-to-end encryption, so you can't be spied on, allegedly. End-to-end encrypted, you can't be spied on, it's hard to hack, things of that nature. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about a Signal group chat. Well, FBI Director Kash Patel joined Benny Johnson yesterday and says the FBI is aware and is investigating the Signal group chat.
okay, so this is breaking news. So you and the FBI and perhaps other intelligence agencies are fully aware of this coordinated effort to attack federal law enforcement, to impede them and potentially insurrect. And so there is now an open investigation into these chats and into this coordinated network.
Yeah, what
some
I
of them
can
are some of them are fleeing. Some of them are very scared now. You can see their chats. They're very, very worried now that they have been exposed.
Well, they should be. If they broke the law, you should be worried. It's that simple. If you didn't break the law, there's really nothing to worry about on that front. And so, we're going to continue, as I've said from day one, we will protect law enforcement. We will make sure they have the security and safety to do their jobs. We will also ensure that civilians have the ultimate protection of the First and Second Amendment. But it is my job to adjudicate the difference when there is a breaking of federal statute or state law in the furtherance of a crime or violence against law enforcement officers, and that's when we step in.
Seems to me, from what I've seen from that Signal group chat, there as at the very least prima facie evidence for criminal conspiracy. At the very least. Now, if I had my druthers, everybody involved with that Signal chat who is basically, it's a criminal syndicate. They should all be sitting in jail. Well, it seems like it was sweet serendipity. I didn't really praise Chicago at all. I just noted that they at least have someone in the chain of law enforcement, given their chief of police, who's at least counter-signaling some of the worst elements, the worst impulses of the left in that city. Well, it's like they heard me yesterday, and Mayor Brandon Johnson wants you to know for sure that he's not down with the pro-immigration enforcement struggle.
The forces of hate and division cannot solve the problems we face today. They cannot solve the issue of poverty or hunger in Chicago any more than they can solve them in Appalachia. As Keene put it quite clearly, white supremacy can feed their egos, but not their stomachs. We need to continue the hard work of building a multicultural, intergenerational movement across this country to fight back against the three evils of poverty, militarism, and racism. It was regular working class Chicagoans who organized town halls and trainings and marches to send a message.
Blah. Those comments from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson came shortly before he participated and spoke at an Ice Out event in Chicago. Pretty unbelievable stuff. Caroline Leavitt, back at the White House press secretary, made sure the nation knew that provocateurs like Brandon Johnson, Tim Walz, and others are not off the hook for what they have been fomenting.
Created dangerous situations threatening both these officers and the general public and Minnesotans alike. This is precisely what unfolded in Minneapolis on Saturday morning. Obstructing federal law enforcement and inciting violence against officers is wrong and illegal. This used to be a universally accepted position in the United States. Amid the hysteria, we must remember how we got here to this moment today and what this Democrat opposition is about. Former President Joe Biden and the Democrats opened America's borders for 4 years, inviting tens of millions of illegal aliens from all over the world to flood into our country. Among them, violent criminals who terrorized American communities and have inflicted devastating, permanent pain and harm on law-abiding Americans and their families. Yet we never saw outrage from Democrats or their allies in the liberal media over these horrifying crimes against U.S. citizens. The pain of American angel families was ignored and dismissed because it undermined the Democrat narrative.
That is White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Amen, sister. Amen and amen. That's it for immigration for now. Let's talk about this. Had a couple of these stories recently. Last week, Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, met with Xi Jinping in China, signaled that he's ready to get in bed with China. Then, over the weekend, President Trump threatened Canada with 100% tariffs if they decide to be a dumping ground for Chinese goods. And now Canada, Freudian slip. Now Canada says, Mark Carney says, they have, quote, no intention of pursuing a free trade deal with China. Speaking to reporters, Carney said the country respects its obligations under the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, known as CUSMA in Canada and the USMCA in the U.S., and will not pursue a free trade deal agreement without notifying the other two parties. So that's maybe some good news we just cannot afford to have somebody who is tightly in bed with the Chi-Coms inhabiting our northern border. You thought the Cuban Missile Crisis was bad? How about the duplicitous Canadians getting in bed with the Chinese? That would be 10 times worse. When we come back, CNN's just letting anybody on these days. Also, we go to the United Kingdom, where George Orwell would be proud, and more dispatches from NATO. That's coming up next. We go now to CNN, who's letting just anybody on. This is some anti-ICE protester. Don't even know him. Never seen him before. He came on with Jake Tapper, who looks like he is a prisoner of his own mind, because he is. Went on CNN to say this nonsense.
I understand that, but they take people to Fort Snelling here, which literally was built as a concentration camp, and Alligator Alcatraz, which I think we can all agree is a concentration camp. Not saying they're Dachau. I'm not saying they're putting people in ovens yet, but these are concentration camps.
Okay, that's quite the even Goebbels' Jake Tapper, who is this generation's Joseph Goebbels. Even Jake Tapper is like, oh, okay, let's not go crazy here, bucko. Incredible stuff. The dude, even the most hardened left-winger, who would gladly go out and murder ICE agents right now, is sitting there thinking, that's a bit of a stretch. We're going from deporting violent criminals to we're going to start putting you directly into the ovens. Bro, the United States government, I think the number is $2,000. They will pay illegals, any illegal, $2,000, pay for their plane ticket out of the country. That's a long ways away from putting them in an oven. They're going to give them $2,000, a pile of cash, and a free one-way plane ticket. That's a bit of a stretch. Just a bit. Let's go across the pond to the United Kingdom. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, that's a problem. Shabana Mahmood had this to say about a new law enforcement technology.
Others are fighting crime in a digital age with analog methods. We will ensure that every force is adopting the latest technology led out of the new National Police Service. And this will include the largest ever rollout of live facial recognition technologies across England and Wales. We know this approach works. In London, in just 2 years, the Metropolitan Police have made 1,700 arrests, taking robbers, domestic abusers and rapists off our streets. When the future arrives, there are always doubters. 100 years ago, fingerprinting was decried as curtailing our civil liberties, but today we could not imagine policing without it.
Shabana Mahmood, UK Home Secretary, justifying the use of facial recognition technology, saying it's just the same thing as fingerprinting was 100 years ago. Again, just a bit of a stretch, Fingerprinting typically only done to somebody who has been suspected of or arrested for a crime. And then it goes into a database. You don't take everybody's fingerprints. But with facial recognition software, you're taking everybody's face prints. Everybody's. That is some Orwellian garbage right there. NATO Chief Rutte, once again underscoring during a NATO meeting in recent days, underscoring how, in his view, President Trump is actually right to want to have Greenland.
So when President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him. And I don't mind him publishing text messages. And if anyone thinks here, again, that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't. We can't. We need each other. And why do we need each other? I tell you. First of all, because also the US needs NATO. And the US is not only in NATO to prevent a mistake after the First World War, not to re-engage with Europe. And then again, the long arm of history reaching out to the US again in the Second World War, as Churchill famously said in his speech in 1941 in the US Congress. They are also in NATO because for the US to stay safe, and by the way, Arctic region is evidence here, they need a secure Arctic, they need a secure Euro-Atlantic, and they also need a secure Europe. So the US has every interest in NATO as much as Canada and the European NATO allies. But for Europe, if you really want to go it alone, and those of you who are planning for that, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. You will lose then, in that scenario, you would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella. Good luck.
Mark Rutte, NATO chief, the NATO Secretary General. Complete and total capitulation to American interests. That's the second story. Mark Carney in Canada. Yeah, it turns out we're not going to get in bed with China after Trump threatened 100% tariffs. NATO's Secretary General, after signaling much the same things last week, just completely saying the exact same thing to other NATO leaders during this meeting this week, saying, hey, you want to go it alone without the United States? Good luck. You can't. That's nonsense. Now, I don't know why we still need to be involved with NATO. I didn't really find his argument compelling, but at least they recognize, or at least their Secretary General is starting to recognize that they're getting the better end of the bargain here. Let's go to this. We're going to go to Washington State. This story, courtesy of KOMO TV.
At a corner store just up the street. The stabbing happened at the SS Quick Stop grocery store. Pierce County deputies say the victim told officers that the suspect asked what religion he was, and when he said he was a Christian, the suspect reportedly stabbed him and his dog. Both were taken to hospitals in serious condition, and deputies say the dog went into emergency surgery. Deputies were searching for the suspect then for more than 2 hours after he ran from the stabbing scene. He was spotted by deputies around 8:40 a.m. who made contact with the suspect in a house's backyard. Armed with multiple knives, officers say the suspect was resisting arrest and made movements toward deputies. He was then shot by multiple deputies. Police say he was later pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Now the Pierce County Force Investigation Team is handling the scene.
To collect
Islamist jihad in Washington State. Parkland, Washington State. Man just out walking his dog. Guy comes up to him, asks him what religion he is. He says Christian, and so he gets stabbed, and his dog was stabbed. The attacker then committed suicide by police after resisting arrest. Just a heinous, tragic story. And yet again, another indication, I assume, why deportations are so important. It's also another indication, it's also another reminder that Islam is just not compatible with Western civilization. When we come back, this post made the rounds yesterday, everywhere. And it was sent to me by a number of people. I had read it first before it was sent to me. And it's a pretty staggering view of what's actually happening in Minnesota right now. We're going to discuss that and what I think is going on with the president and Minnesota leaders coming up next. And now here's this. This was sent to me several times yesterday. Eric Schwalm says he is a retired Green Beret. In response to independent journalist Cam Higby's undercover expose of his infiltration of that Signal group chat in Minnesota, Eric Schwalm, this retired Green Beret, said what he's seeing in Minnesota with radical left-wingers reminds him of his own experience. Here's what he said in a post on X, quote, "As a former Special Forces warrant officer with multiple rotations running counterinsurgency ops, both hunting insurgents and trying to separate them from sympathetic populations, I've seen organized resistance up close, from N-Bar to Helmand. The pattern is familiar. Spotters, cutouts, dead drops, or modern equivalents. Disciplined communications, role specialization, and a willingness to absorb casualties while bleeding the stronger force slowly. What's unfolding in Minneapolis right now isn't protest. It's low-level insurgency infrastructure built by people who've clearly studied the playbook. Signal groups at 1,000 member cap per zone. Dedicated roles, mobile chasers, license plate checkers, logging vehicle data into shared databases, 24/7 dispatch nodes, vectoring assets, salute-style reporting, that's size, activity, location, unit, time, equipment, on suspected federal vehicles. Daily chat rotations and timed deletions to frustrate forensic recovery, vetting processes for new joiners, mutual aid from sympathetic locals, teachers providing cover, possible police department tip-offs on license plate lookups, home-based coordination points, rapid escalation from observation to physical obstruction or worse. This isn't spontaneous outrage. This is C2, command and control, with redundancy, OPSEC hygiene, that would be operational security hygiene, and task organization that would make a special forces team and sergeant nod in recognition. Replace ICE agents with occupying coalition forces, and the structure maps almost one-to-one to early-stage urban cells we hunted in the mid-2000s. The most sobering part? It's domestic, funded, trained somewhere, and directed by people who live in the same country they're trying to paralyze law enforcement in. When your own citizens build and operate this level of parallel intelligence and rapid response network against federal officers, complete with doxing, vehicle pursuits, and harassment that's already turned lethal, you're no longer dealing with civil disobedience. You're facing a distributed resistance that's learned the lessons of successful insurgencies. Stay below the kinetic threshold most of the time, force overreaction when possible, maintain popular support through narrative, and never present a single center of gravity. I spent years training partner forces to dismantle exactly this kind of apparatus. Now pieces of it are standing up in American cities, enabled by elements of local government and civil society. That should keep every thinking American awake at night. Not because I want escalation, but because history shows these things don't de-escalate on their own once the infrastructure exists and the cadre believe they're winning the information war. We either recognize what we're actually looking at, or we pretend it's still just activism until the structures harden and spread. Your call, America. But from where I sit, this isn't January 2026 politics anymore. It's phase one of something we've spent decades trying to keep off our own soil. That is a post from a retired Green Beret named Eric Schwalm. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. I'm not going to add any more to that because obviously that retired Green Beret knows more about insurgency warfare, under the ground insurgent warfare than I ever will. So I'm just going to let that stand for itself. What I do want to talk about, though, is what we saw at the White House yesterday. These series of events. Just to reset this for you. Early in the morning, well, it was 8:30 in the morning, Central Time, President Trump posts that he's sending Tom Homan to Minnesota immediately. The next thing we see from Trump is that Tim Walz called him. Why do I keep harping on that detail? I think it's pretty important. Tim Walz called him. We'll get to that in a minute. The next post we see from Trump in the afternoon is that he has communicated and had a phone call with Jacob Frey, Minneapolis mayor. And then the next thing we learn is that Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino and some of his agents are leaving Minnesota. Now, I did not see this. I think I misread it or skipped over it until after I had seen the information about Greg Bovino leaving Minnesota. I'll tell you, yesterday afternoon, I was pretty disheartened when I saw those reports about Bovino leaving Minnesota with some of his Border Patrol agents. I thought that looked like a complete and total capitulation. It still might be, and only the ensuing days will tell. We need to let some time go by to see what's really going on here. But I think there's two ways to view this. Either Trump is deathly frightened, and he is indeed caving big time and selling out his base, and basically selling out the entire power of his presidency. Either that's what's happening here, or for whatever reason, and I think there might be a pretty key reason that went under the radar as well, local Minnesota leadership are actually starting to feel the pressure. Here's why. And that's where the whole who called whom thing comes into play. If it is true that Tim Walz was the one to call President Trump, that means that Tim Walz on some level felt pressure, that he was the one who had to pick up the phone. Now, where would he have felt that pressure from? Well, this kind of went under the radar. It was kind of decried in some areas, but it might actually be good news. Because on Sunday, I think it was Sunday morning, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, speaking on behalf of 60 CEOs in Minnesota, said this: "With yesterday's tragic news, we are calling for an immediate de-escalation of tensions and for our state, local, and federal officials to work together to find real solutions." I kind of wonder, executives at General Mills, executives at Ecolab, executives at 3M, executives at United Health Group, executives at Target, Best Buy, all of these corporations headquartered in the Twin Cities. I wonder if they started getting to Tim Walz either directly or through back channels and saying, we can't do business. People are afraid to come to the Twin Cities. This is no way to do business. Do whatever you need to do to make it stop. I wonder if that's what's happening here. Because if that's not what's happening here, it's complete and total capitulation to the communists, and the communists won. I hope that's what's happening here. If it was Tim Walz that called Trump, Tim Walz obviously felt some pressure somewhere. Definitely not from his base, that's for sure. He's the one that's been ginning them all up. I'm wondering if some of the big corporations in Minnesota, some of those executives, I wonder if they started to turn the screws on Tim Walz. And all of a sudden, we've got some signals that maybe, just maybe, we're not as committed to being a sanctuary state after all. So that's one way you can view this. Tim Walz feels pressure, and that's why he is maybe, this is the way it's been spun from President Trump and his allies, maybe he's capitulating. Because the other alternative is that it's Trump who's just surrendering. Got scared, blinked, surrendered. Those are kind of the only two ways that I can read yesterday's developments out of the White House. What do you think? Let me know at RealAmUpdate on X. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.